Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jimmy Nin, and I'm here to present on the contents of Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species. The book introduced the scientific theory that population evolves over the course of generation through a process of natural selection, something we commonly know as evolution. Also, the book presents a body of evidence that the diversity of life arose by common descent through branching patterns of growth. Darwin included evidence that he had gathered on the Beagle expedition in the 1830s and his subsequent finding from research, correspondence, and experimentation. For this particular presentation, I will be focusing on the theories presented by Darwin and a quick summary of all the chapters of the book. Now, the theories of origin of species can be broken down to several inferences and key facts. I will highlight 3 facts and 2 inferences. The first fact is that every species is fertile enough that if all the offspring survives to reproduce the population would grow. The second fact is that despite periodic fluctuation, population remain roughly the same size. And now the last fact is that resources such as food are limited and relatively stable over time. An inference that relates to that is that the struggle of survival ensues because of resources are limited, and that individuals with less suited to the environment are likely less to survive, and therefore likely less to reproduce. Thus, these weaker individuals died off. That's also an inference. Now, these points establish the main focus of the origin of species, and kind of exemplify what Darwin's trying to do or trying to convey when he's writing the book from his finding. And now I'd like to explain more on the book on itself, starting with the introduction, where one of the most interesting is that Darwin's claim right away is that his theory doesn't prove against the existence of God, but he stated that God could work through scientific law as much as through miracles. Some claim that this proves Darwin's respectable attitude towards religion as maybe a functioning factor in the theory of evolution, but most people believe that he did that out of self-defense so that he wouldn't be persecuted for his work, which can be seen in the fact that he published his work after his death. So I decided to pick a single quote from the intro to highlight the main points that Darwin's trying to accomplish with his work, and that as many more of individuals each species are born than possibly can survive, consequently that their frequently recurring struggle for existence. It follows that any being, if it vary however slightly in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate its new form and modified form. Now I'll begin the summary of the chapters of Origin of Species, with chapter 1 covering animal husbandry and plant breeding, going back to ancient Egypt, where Charles Darwin highlight the contemporary opinions of the origin of different breeds under the cultivation to argue that many of these plant species has been produced from a common ancestor by selective breeding. In chapter 2, Darwin specified the distinction between species and variety is arbitrary, with experts disagreeing and changing their decision when new forms are found. Chapter 3, Darwin asked how the varieties, which he has called incipient species, have become distinct species, and in answer introduced a key concept, which is natural selection. Now, natural selection, as we know, is a gradual and non-random process by which biological traits becomes either more or less common in a population as a functional different reproduction of their bearers. It is the key mechanism of evolution and understanding the origin of species. So I would say chapter 3 is very, very important. Chapter 4 and 5 detail the natural selection under the infinity complex and close-fitting mutual relationship of all organic beings to each other and their physical condition of life, in which he takes an example that some change in condition led to extinction of some species, immigration of others, and where suitable variation occurs. Chapter 5 deals with whether natural selection could produce a complex and specialized structure and how the behavior used them. Chapter 6 of the first edition, which is what we're discussing, this addresses the evolution of instinct. His example include the two he had investigated experimentally, slave-making ants and the construction of hexagon cells by honeybees. He noted that some species of the slave-making ants were more dependent on the slaves than others, and that he observed that many of the ants will collect and store the pupae of other species as food. Chapter 7 addresses the idea that species has special characteristics that prevent hybrids from becoming fertile in order to preserve separately created species. Chapter 9 and 10 deals with geographic records and how it's likely to create a link between species that had a common ancestor, namely fossil records. Chapter 11-12 deals with evidence from biogeography, starting with observation that different flora and fauna from separate regions cannot be explained by environmental differences alone, such as South America, Africa, and Australia all have regions with similar climates at similar latitude, but those regions have very different plants and animals. Darwin noted that barrier to migration played an important role in differences in species of different regions. Chapter 13 starts by observing the classification dependent on species being grouped together in a multi-level system of on a multi-level system of groups and subgroups based on a varying degree of resemblance. And finally, the final chapter reviews the points from the earlier chapter, and Charles Darwin concluded that by hoping that his theory might produce a revolutionary change in many fields of natural history. Although he avoided the controversial topic of human origin in the rest of the book, so he asked not to be prejudiced readers against his theory. Here he ventures in a cautious hint that psychology would put a new foundation, that light will be thrown on the origin of man. Thank you very much for your attention, and ladies, please take it away.